quite a few people on the call. Lovely, I can see that. Okay, welcome everybody. This is the first in a series of Zoom events designed to sort of celebrate and prepare for COP26 in November, when UK is going to host the 26th UN Climate Conference. And these events, which are going to be monthly, will cover different climate themes and bring together experts and examples of best practice to address how we can achieve net zero, both collectively and individually. My name's Lisa, I'm chairing the session today, and this event's being organised by Transition Chesterfield. For anybody that's just joined, just to say, you know, please mute yourself, please put any questions in the chat with a Q, and we'll have two speakers. So just before we start, I just want to give you a quote. We can reach net zero. We can meet it by 2050 and the mechanism is there. That means stop building crap houses that don't give the owners a proper kind of energy efficiency. It means let's have the kind of heating that doesn't need fossil fuels. So that's not from Greenpeace, that's from Lord Deeburn, the chair of the Committee on Climate Change, speaking to the House of Lords in 2019, and he's not mincing his words. So let's stop building crap houses and let's see how we can build really good energy efficient houses. And we've got two fantastic speakers today. We've got Martin Valentine from Positive Homes Limited and Dave Bradley Bowes from Pure House Limited. And we're going to start with Dave. Dave and Kevin, their company Pure House, they're striving to build zero carbon homes inspired by Passive House and building healthy homes. So Dave, would you like to share your screen? And I think, Dave, you're going to start with a short video just to explain what Passive House is all about. So if you'd like to share your screen now, that would be great.
Okay, should be sharing. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah, that's great.
There we go. That should be about, oh no. Have you got my notes on there?
I've got your notes there.
Bear with me.
That's it, perfect.
Is that it?
Dave, you're muted, just unmute.
How's that? Can you all hear me now?
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect. So my name's Dave Bradley Bowles and I'm director at Pure House. My journey started quite a long time ago in terms of my interest in climate and changing the world that we live in. A couple of years ago, I was in Iceland, and the reason I share this is that it's the one place in the world where I felt that if you want to go and see the effects of climate change, go to Iceland. The country is a remarkable place, incredibly beautiful, an abundance of natural resources, and the people there are making headway on, sustainability. I mean, 85% of their domestic energy comes from renewable energy. Meanwhile, their own garden, their back door, their back door space is eroding away because of climate change. Over the last 30 years, we've seen 1 million square kilometres of ice detract away, and that's an area as big as Norway, Denmark, and Sweden put together. So it's a huge area, and it's really affecting their environment. So I'm involved in construction and property investing in general, and at that point decided that for the future of our business, we had to focus on where construction was going to be in 10 years' time and not try to compete with local builders on just building, as Lisa put it, just building crap housing that's using fossil fuels. After immersing myself in all the information I could get my hands on, Passive House became the obvious way forward for us. There's several elements to what makes a passive house, but essentially it is to remove the need for heating in the property, so therefore removing your need for gas central heating and such. So I'll play you this 90-second video, which should give you a very quick summary of what takes me 10 minutes to say.
Passive House explained in 90 seconds. Does your house have a heater in the basement or maybe a fireplace? Probably also a central air conditioner or maybe a window unit. Did you ever wonder if it was necessary? In 1991, a physicist in Austria, Dr. Feist, built the first passive house. Here's what he did. 1. Proper insulation. It's just like wearing the right winter jacket. It also doesn't need a heater. 2. No air leakages. There should be no holes, small or large, to let hot air out of the house. 3. No thermal bridges. A thermal bridge is like a road for heating energy in which warmth can travel right through your walls. As a matter of fact, most of our houses have thermal highways in our walls where heat can easily travel to the outside. Plus, the house needs proper windows most of the time with triple pane glass. It needs to be oriented properly so the sun can heat it in the winter and shade is provided in the summer. And it uses an HRV, a device that provides the inside with fresh air without letting the heat out. Add all these things up, and it turns out your house doesn't need a heater or air conditioner. So where does the heat come from? A passive house needs 90% less energy, and that can easily be supplied by your body heat, the sun, your appliances, light bulbs, and even your TV. This saves you a lot of money on your heating bill and helps preserve the environment. Did we make it in 90 seconds? You bet we did.
Bear with me while we switch back. How's that? Can you go back to that screen?
Yeah, good.
Super stuff. So that gives you an idea of what a passive house is for those that don't know that. And this was, you know, the route that we were going to go now, build houses that just doesn't need energy, focus on low energy consumption. Renewables was a second part to it for us. So just rewinding a few years ago, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors came up with a target system to help the construction industry bring down the carbon footprint and based on the life cycle. So we're talking about the construction, the occupancy, and the final phase of demolition and recycling a building. Now, as of 2020, we're supposed to have already reduced down from 1,000 kilograms of carbon per square meter down to 600, so a 40% reduction. I don't know a single organization that has been told to measure their carbon footprint. So how anybody knows whether or not this is being achieved, it's just not out there. It's impossible. I suppose it's a bit of a joke, really. By 2030, the objective is to be at less than 300 kilograms of carbon per square meter. It is achievable and it can be achieved now. And that's exactly what we've done. So we've progressed on to build a BT passive engineered home to the to passive house standard, and we've had our carbon footprint calculated for us, and we're at 250 kilograms per square meter. So this idea of phasing isn't actually necessary if we can make headway and just set targets for organisations to move towards, but also enforce, you know, the idea of measuring and calculating out the carbon. So I'll run through a few photographs of our timber frame home that's going up. What we're doing here is we're building it from a stick frame system, and it goes together a bit like a Meccano set. And then we board it both on the inside and the outside, creating a hollow void. And then once we have the hollow void, we wrap it for weatherproofing from the outside, then wrap it with Intello, an air tightness membrane on the inside. So that way we achieve our air tightness, and then we inject it full of insulation after, putting that warm, cozy blanket all the way around the home. The external finish is decorative. So on this occasion, we're I'd say we're Scandinavian inspired in design. So we went for a Siberian larch, and it just sits into the countryside and just looks beautiful. You know, we don't have to go with stone built buildings. It's all about, you know, this house, perhaps it has a life expectancy of say 100 years, and then it's very easy to recycle the components and bring back and replace a modern home for 100 years time, something appropriate. So having built our first 2 homes, our prototypes, we're now looking at how we speed up and increase production so that we can bring this to the market. We predominantly want to work with housing associations and local authorities so that we can bring volume to the market, so that low carbon homes that use very little energy, are easily accessible at all levels. And these are no longer grand designs and self-build projects. And you know, we want to compete with the house builders. Before this presentation came into discussion, I was involved in discussion with Lisa and a number of other people from a forum about how things can move forward. And I've seen a great example from Gravenhill, down near Bicester, around Bicester area. And they've taken a huge site of 1,200 homes, and they've subdivided it up into plot sizes that are appropriate for all levels. So there'll be areas that are being built out where 400 homes are being delivered by, you know, 1 or 2 of the big house builders. Then plots of 100, 20, 40, 50 are also up for sale. And I suppose what they've done there is they are breaking up the monopoly over house building by offering the opportunity to smaller developers and homeowners the chance to come along and build their own homes and build quality homes. And I think the only way we're ever going to see change in this industry is if this monopoly comes to an end from the major house builders, whereby they can build as they've always built and always want to continue to build, because it's ease, it's a system they have already implemented, and it doesn't require any effort to change. And they need competition, and that competition will come from pathfinders, you know, the smaller organisations that want to shake things up. And that is me in a nutshell. So I'll hand back to Lisa.
Brilliant, thank you, Dave. And I forgot to mention, you're from West Yorkshire, aren't you? So those houses that you showed in what? Yeah, thank you. Brilliant, thank you very much, Dave. That was a really great introduction and fantastic what you're doing. And I'm sure we'll get onto the whole Gravenhill model, because that looks like a fantastic model that we could be looking at in Derbyshire. So now we'll move on to our second speaker, Martin Valentine from Positive Homes Limited. Martin's actually got a housing development in Chesterfield, which you can go and see, and has built in other parts of the region as well. So he's built super energy efficient, sensibly priced homes across the region that generate more energy than they consume. He previously worked for Nottingham City Homes and is passionate about building homes to the highest energy standards. So Martin, if you'd like to start sharing your screen now, that'd be great.
Hello, everyone. It's really weird presenting to people when you're not physically in front of them. So you don't know if anyone's actually hearing you unless you sort of wave and they wave back. So, right, well, there you go. I've got a few waves. Right, let's see if I can make this work. We've only had a year after all of doing this, all this sort of stuff. So like, how on earth would we have figured out how to actually do it by now? We did, however, give it a little test before we started. So hopefully this is going to work. Hang on a sec while I just get my act together. Right, what is everybody? Oh, that's a sneak preview. Let's just get going. Come on, machine. Right.
Good.
Can everybody see that first slide?
Yep.
And is that all you're seeing? Just that first slide? Because that's progress if it is. Right. I'll kick off then. So yes, thanks Lisa. Yes, you're right, except for one thing, is we haven't quite nailed the bit about houses generating more energy than they use yet. That is the ambition. That's why we're called Positive Homes. The idea being that the houses are energy positive. Dave and I have discovered in the last 20 minutes, actually, before we started this, that we have something in common, is that we're also aficionados of the BT passive system. It is the best house building system out there. My chairman actually owns a share of BT passive and sits on their board, and it's the Rolls-Royce of systems, which we haven't actually used yet. So as I'll come to in a minute, but what have we done? So in case you don't know anything about who on earth Positive Homes is, oh, come on, machine, move. No, it needs to move. Right, so here we go. We are, set up 2016. We've done sort of 5 developments now, and we are building as a minimum to that A-rated standard. You know, like your fridge and your washing machine has those little certificates. So do houses. And if you've seen me do this, if you've tuned into one of my previous presentations, you know this is one of my little bugbears in life. As I will come to in a minute. So the houses that Lisa mentioned here, they're on the Prospect Road and William Street North up in Old Whittington. Almost passive houses, the way we describe them, not a million miles off, very, very close. A bit like the BT system that Dave's using. These are timber frame, flat pack timber frame, so they go up in a week or so, and then you do all the finishing off inside. And the key thing there is that, you know, for relatively simple process, we managed to get houses that are, you know, under that magic £1 a day energy bill. So that's not far off £0 a day, which is what we're driving towards. But those first houses are 76p a day. We averaged that, which we're really pleased with. And then when we realised we need to actually make a profit, we thought we'd try a slightly different approach. And that's when we fixated on this A-rated badge, which is not the same as Passive House. But as you'll see, it's extremely important staging post. So here's some, again, more timber frame houses we built in Nottingham. The city council there sold us the land on the basis that we must do an eco development. It wasn't just, you know, here's some land and you build whatever you like. It was actually condition of the contract, and there's a model there for how all public sector land should be sold, in my opinion. And it's not how public sector land is sold now, and that's a real disappointment. But we'll come to that in a minute. So if we're going to build net zero carbon houses, we first have to understand where we're actually at. And the answer is nowhere. 99% of all the houses that have been built in this country in the last 12 years will need retrofitting for energy efficiency in the next 30 years if we are to hit that net zero carbon target. And so every year we are adding more and more houses to the housing stock which are not good enough, including my sister's new house, which I will touch on in a minute. But yes, feel free to download all of these. And in case anybody wants to find out what's happening in Derbyshire, well, here's the numbers for Derbyshire. I need to update them for 2020, but basically Derbyshire's performance when it comes to A-rated houses is abysmal, utterly and absolutely abysmal. The national rate of houses, like I say, is 1% of new houses. In Derbyshire, it's only 0.37%. And if you have the if you're fortunate enough to live in Bolsover, then not a single house in Bolsover has been built to that energy rating of A, not one in the last 12 years. And Amber Valley's not doing much better at 1. Big up Chesterfield and to some extent Northeast Derbyshire for doing a bit better, but we'll come back to Northeast Derbyshire in a minute. So why does this matter in terms of net zero? Well, first off, we've got to stop building rubbish houses. And that's because, as Jan Rosenau from the RSA will tell you, heating homes emits more carbon than all the coal power plants in Europe. Now, we don't have many coal power plants left in Britain, but there's an awful lot of them in Europe. Decarbonising heating is absolutely critical if we want to stand a chance of meeting net zero carbon goals. And the simplest way to decarbonise heating is to not have to have much heating in the first place. Which brings us to another problem. So where are we? Right, well, the UN has decided to tackle climate change by holding a giant conference, presumably involving lots of people flying from all over the world, generating tons and tons of carbon, which strikes me as rather stupid. But anyway, the government's contribution to this is we're going to make new homes net zero carbon ready by 2025. This is the future home standard. Well, that sounds marvelous, right? Radically improving the energy performance of our new homes. Well, you're radically improving it from a very low base, making them net zero carbon ready by 2025. Well, that's terrific. So we don't need to worry. The government's going to save the day. They're going to legislate for it, and all new houses will have to be to that standard. Well, that's fantastic. So how do we do that? Well, in simple terms, all we have to do is get all of these lovely people and their compadres in the big builders to carry on building more of these kind of houses. And that's it. Done. All over. Nothing else to do. Nothing else to see here. Completely done. Finished. Nothing to see. So, okay, well, hey, that doesn't make any sense. Well, let me explain a bit. Net zero carbon ready, and the word ready is doing all the heavy lifting here. Now, the government's magic plan is that we'll have 600,000 heat pumps installed every year by 2028. This is an air source heat pump to replace your gas boiler. They're going to ban gas boilers in new houses from 2023. That's just 2 years away. Slight problem with that. That means they've got to get somewhere from the 30,000 that are installed at the moment up to 600,000. And what's the plan to do that? There isn't one, none whatsoever. The Committee for Climate Change, the government's own committee, says we need to install 1.5 million of these things. The fitting of them can be awful if you do the wrong thing. And the BBC, as they report here, says it's hard to exaggerate the scale of doing replacing 25 million gas boilers. I'll send out this presentation later and you can click on all the links and enjoy yourself. So let's go back to my sister's new house. This is a Persimmon house. This is down near Gatwick Airport. And it's lovely when you move into Persimmon House. They give you a lovely box full of stuff. And inside that, you'll have all the things about your brand new house built to the very high standards, isn't it, everyone? Anyway, our houses have an air tightness score of sort of 1-ish, something like that. Dave's houses have an air tightness score of about 0.5. This house has an air tightness score of 6.5, which is a fail, apparently, because Persimmon are trying to do it to 5, even though the government only requires you to do it to 10. However, this is a net zero carbon ready house. And the reason it is because all you have to do is take out the gas boiler, put some electric radiators in, job done. There you go, problem solved. And of course, this is very bad news, because all in reality that net zero carbon means is decarbonising the grid, the electricity grid, getting rid of the power stations, sticking in more wind turbines, more solar farms. The grid will be decarbonised. All the electricity into your house will be net zero carbon. Your house won't use any fossil fuels. Problem solved. There you go, done. What that means in reality, because we're not doing anything about the actual fabric of the building, it's still bricks and mortar, it's still thrown up on a building site in a rush by people who don't really care that much, is your energy bills will go from being £1,000-ish a year to, who knows, they're going to triple, double or triple at least, because you have electric heating now. Begs a wider question of who should actually pay for it, but I don't think necessarily it should sit on the consumers, because people are going to get conned by this. They're not going to realise what they're buying into. So how do we fix this? Well, our solution is to go down the manufacturing route. Houses are constructed, not manufactured. We, however, prefer to go a different route, which is get them built in a factory and get them built to an incredibly high standard. So this is what we've just done in Newark. Houses craned into position. So we installed 9 houses in 5 days, and 2 days later we had the water on and we had the electrics on. And a month later, the houses were fit to be occupied. These houses built to this standard, you can easily swap the gas boiler out for an air source heat pump, and it is a genuinely net zero carbon house. And I also happen to think they're rather beautiful as well. And Homes England liked it, the government's agency liked it and gave us, well, didn't give us, they loaned us a load of money to do it. And it was just brilliant to watch these things just appear out of nowhere on the back of this huge truck. So all good fun, but the build quality is so much higher, which means you can actually get the air tightness, you can get the air leakages down to next to nothing, you can heat it using hardly any heating whatsoever. But this begs a bigger question, which is, what do we actually mean by net zero? What is it? Are we talking about the house? As Dave points out, is it the embodied energy of the house, the materials that go into the house? Is it the usage of the house? Or is it something a bit more fundamental than that? So as everyone on this call will know, climate emergency, all the councils declaring climate emergencies, which is marvellous, right? Isn't it just a lovely thing? So what? Who cares? Right, so with apologies to anybody from North East Derbyshire District Council who is on this call, I'm now about to give you a right good kicking. So apologies in advance if anyone's in that, or anyone who particularly likes the council. Here we go. Right, North East Derbyshire have declared a climate emergency and produced actually what I think is quite a good document, the Climate Change Action Plan 2019 to 2030, full of lots of really good things. Let's just quote from the theme 5, the planning theme. Local authority planning functions are a key lever in reducing emissions and tackling the effects of climate change. The planning process can make a major contribution. And they also say in the transport section, low carbon transport solutions present huge opportunities, not just for climate change, but for our wider community health and wider environment. Well, that's great. We thought that's terrific. So if a bit of land comes up in, let's say, North Wingfield, for example, in North East Derbyshire, we'll live up to that and say, let's put a bid in. Let's put a bid in for smaller homes, starter homes. Let's create some new green space. Let's open it up to the land to the west of this, which is all open space. Let's reduce the number of car parking spaces down. Let's build the new Working Men's Club, if you know this site, to a really high eco standard as well. The council are going to love that, right? You think they'd be falling over themselves to say this is all marvellous. So let's quote from the planning officer's comments when we put the pre-application advice in, shall we? In short, too many houses, it looks far too dense and nowhere near enough car parking spaces. No way we could support this. The scheme appears to be incredibly dense. It's less than 40 homes a hectare, which means it's actually not dense enough, but I digress. And it's incredibly dense with swathes of frontage parking, but also not enough parking, because you should have 2 spaces per house, regardless of how big the house is. So, okay, so the only way to do that is to take houses out, which means I can't afford to do it, which means I can't make a profit, which means I can't build eco houses. So anybody want to make sense of that? Anybody? What? Hey? Oh, and of course, it's not just about the cars, of course. Don't forget the ubiquitous bin lorry. It's all about the bin lorries. It's like we must be able to drive up and down in our enormous 11-meter gas guzzling truck. And the club, well, do you really need a working men's club? Well, I don't think you do. But if you do, make sure it has enough parking. So what do you suppose they had to say about literally anything else to do with the scheme, its environmental credentials? What do you think they had to say about biodiversity, trees, public space, low energy bills? Zip, nothing, absolutely nothing, not interested at all. And this is despite the fact that they have a lovely climate change action plan where they're committed to actually doing this. And that's simply because housing developments are not designed around people, they're not designed around the environment, they're designed around bin lorries. And no one seems to have got the message in North East Derbyshire, and I suspect a lot of other places as well. So if this was a school report, must try harder. So what we're going to do about this, this is all lovely and fun, but what can we do that's practical and sensible? Well, some of you may be aware that the government are currently consulting on something called the National Model Design Code, and also on the National Planning Policy Framework, which all sounds like a cure for insomnia. But actually it's very interesting stuff when you dig into it. And in that design code, it says, if we create a code for saying this is how we want our communities to develop, they can play a framework for creating healthy, greener, and environmentally responsible, sustainable places with more energy efficient buildings integrating into the natural environment and contributing to that net zero carbon target. There is a clear link between the type of house that you build and how it sits in an environment. Dave just showed you one example of that, and whether it's 2 homes or 200 homes, the principle still applies. You have to look at the whole thing holistically. So getting the house bit right is one thing, but actually making it the right kind of environment, the right kind of culture is also just as important. So I'm going to leave you with 4 things that you can do. First off, respond to the consultation. It closes rather specifically at 11:45 on the 27th of March, so you've got time. Whatever local authority your area you're in, go and find their climate change action plan. Go and look at what they say versus what they're actually doing. North East Wingfield, I'll give you that one for starters. There's a perfect example of it, North East Wingfield, North East Derbyshire. Above all, we're all activists. We all want everything to be perfect, but don't punish very good for not being great is a key thing. Our houses are not perfect. The houses that we as Positive Homes are building are not the finest houses. Dave's doing a far better job than me on that, but they are way above what your average builder is building. And more importantly, if you train as an air source heat pump installer, you're never going to be out of work for the next 10 years. So if you want a job, that's the job to get. Thank you very much. Oh, 15 minutes I was aiming for, Lisa, and I ended up at 15 minutes and 53 seconds. So grave apologies, but I'll shut up now. There you go. Hope that was of some interest. And now how on earth do I end it? Stop the share. There we go. Aha, we're back.
Brilliant. Thank you, Martin. That was
on cue. I got brought a cup of tea. So there you go. So that's marvellous.
Thank you very much. That was a really entertaining and hard-hitting presentation there, and I think we'd like to come back to Nottingham at some point and their model of selling land, specifically for eco homes. As we'll move to questions now. I'll just have to go to the chat, but as chair, can I just ask the first question? I just want to nail this thing about councils. Councils have local plans which say, which set the energy efficiency standards, and we keep hearing from councils that they can't go beyond building regulations, that the government stops them doing this. However, and I think somebody's put a link in the chat to the Green Building Council's interactive map, that many councils are already doing this. Solihull, Milton Keynes, Reading, they specify a reduction in energy efficiency over and above the building regulations, which are appalling anyway. 30% improvement's not great to start with. So is that your understanding, that there's nothing stopping a council setting their local plan to say we want more energy efficient housing than the building regulations?
To the best of my knowledge, no, although the government was threatening it. They were threatening to set a slightly higher standard than we currently have, but no more. The problem is that what you essentially have here is a bit of a race to the bottom. So imagine you're Barrett's or Persimmon or any of those people, and you're going like, well, why would I build over there when I've got to build to this standard, and my cookie cutter designs are designed to meet this standard, and no more. So why would you just say to you're just, quietly putting pressure on the council leaders and senior politicians to say, don't do that, otherwise we're not going to build in your area, and if we're not building in your area, you're not going to hit your housing targets, you're going to lose your 5-year land supply, and there's going to be hell to pay, and you're going to be all sorts of trouble. So for me, it is a bit of a race to the bottom, and it gets, you can start delving into all sorts of interesting conspiracy theories about, backhanders and secret handshakes and conversations in dark alleys and stuff. But yeah, you need to be quite a brave council to say, no, we're going to stick to this standard, and we expect everyone to build to that higher standard, because you are running the risk of possibly being legally challenged by. This is the thing, the big developers would rather challenge you in the courts than actually, spend the same amount of money actually figuring out how to build a better standard of house. I mean, it really is that cynical, and it's very, very upsetting. I think the thing about this is that politicians, being what they are, is if enough people lobby for it and say, no, this is what we want in our area. If council starts setting design codes, if it gets built into neighbourhood plans to say the design is not just simply what we want it to look like, it's about how we want this to work. Why not just push for it? Drown out the noise of the big PLC developers by saying, no, this is what we want to see, or we'll vote you out of office. And that's simply the best way of going about it. I think just keep going at it, and it'll be a slow process. And of course, lobby the government.
I agree with you there, Martin, on that completely, 100%. That's the same for my experience. It's the monopoly that's driving it. What the local authorities can do, though, is coming back to when they're selling their own land, when they're setting their own projects, they can set a minimum standard and say, right, framework contractors that are coming forward for it, if you cannot deliver schemes that meet these standards, then as a local authority, we're not interested in building them for ourselves. So you're talking about your public buildings and their own housing schemes.
And can I just ask, apart from Nottingham, are you aware of other councils that have done this, have actually set standards?
Exeter is.
Exeter, yes, is a very good example, isn't it? We're actually in conversation at the minute with one Derbyshire local authority who shall remain nameless, Amber Valley. And and they have a couple of big chunky bits of land, and the discussion we're having with them is, please don't sell us the land. In fact, don't sell anyone the land. Keep the land, set up a joint venture with us, and together we will build to the highest possible standard, you know, and we'll only divert from that possible standard if it's an absolutely last resort. The problem with councils is if they sell their land off, they're then taking their, yes, they can put things in the contract, I suppose, but if you're selling off a bit of land for maybe 100 houses or 300 houses, you know, you're going to be in the orbit of the big developers, and the big developers will simply say, we're not interested in talking to you if you're going to insist on higher standards. We want this deal. So the moment you sell it off, you're taking your chances with the planning system, and you're trusting that your local authority lawyers, underpaid, under-resourced, are somehow going to be better than the lawyers from London representing Persimmon and Taylor Wimpey and the like, and you're going to get outgunned. So the answer is very simple to councils, is to do the hard yards, if you like, which is to, yes, specify in the contract, which is a lot easier for smaller sites because you're going with the smaller developers who will be more willing. But equally, you know, better off, don't sell the land, put it in a joint venture, and we'll work it through together, and there'll be much more of a democratic oversight. So we're having some conversations about how we might be able to do that, and, you know, with a bit of luck, it's going to bear some fruit.
We had a conversation with a local councillor here a couple of days ago. In fact, he's actually running for the regional mayor because we've now devolved in our area. And his explanation behind why that can't happen and doesn't happen is because inside the council, it's too fragmented. Your asset teams are trying to generate money. Your planning teams are trying to meet planning policy. Your environmental team are trying to force their agenda. No one has a shared agenda.
Dave, that's brilliant. That example I gave in northeast of North Wingfield. So you have several things going on. You have the land itself is actually owned by the county council. It's an old school site. I don't know if anyone knows the area. It's where the old primary school was, and they've rebuilt the school further up. So they got the land sitting there, and then the bit in the corner is owned by the Working Men's Club, and they came together and said, let's do a joint project. Great, fantastic. The planning authority, of course, is Northeast Derbyshire. So you've immediately got two entirely different organisations going on there. Go back to Derbyshire, and on the one hand, somebody's decided to put this bit of land up for a competitive tender. Simultaneously, you've got the council with its climate emergency. You've got the leader of the council, who I've sat down and spoken to, who's I think is very well intended, and you've got a guy there, the senior councillor there, Tony King, who's the cabinet member for clean growth and all things eco, who's really, really passionate about this stuff. I had a very long conversation with him where I said, look, you've got part of your organisation is selling this bit of land off to the highest bidder, and actually you shouldn't be doing that. You should be doing this as a joint venture with us or with someone. I don't care who you do it with, preferably with us, but do it with someone else. Don't think about the money, think about getting the best possible result. And then they come back at you and say, well, we've got to get best value for the land. We've got to get the most money for the land. The government tells us that's the law. The answer to that is no, that's a load of nonsense. I don't know if anyone saw the Church Commission report the other week, the Church of England report, where I was talking about how the Charity Commission require them to sell their land to the highest bidder. But that's contrary to what they're trying to achieve. And nobody understands this concept of best value. And someone who spent his entire working life in the public sector say that best value means exactly that. It means what's the best value for the land. Value can be measured in many different ways. It isn't about price. And they use it as an excuse because they just want to raise some money because they're all skin. But actually value can be measured in community value, ecological value, the impact of what you're doing in terms of creating jobs, all manner of things. And there's just such a dearth of imagination about that. So a great opportunity was lost in that Northeast Derbyshire site, which we didn't get. They did, however, sell it to I think it was confidential. I better not tell you who it's going to. But it's going to be a good project anyway, although to what environmental standard I couldn't tell you. But Dave's absolutely right. It's fragmented all over the place, and just getting some political pressure from outside, from yourselves, to say, come on, get a bit of a grip on this, will surely make a difference, even if it'll feel like very hard going.
Have other questions there, Lisa?
Yeah, sorry, we started the question. Yes.
You're all day, so.
Tragic. It sounds like lots of heads need to be banged here, but let's move on to, I'm conscious there are questions in the chat here, so I'm going to go through them chronologically, and because it's being recorded, I'm going to ask the people who've put the questions to voice them, if that's okay. So we'll start with Alison. Alison Lee, would you like to ask your question, please?
Hi, yes. Do either of your companies build houses to individual specifications, or do you only do developments of 10, 20 houses, whatever?
You want to go first, Martin?
For us, we're kind of backing away from that now. We could do. To be fair, if we did, we'd use the Beatty passive system, which is what Dave's using, because you can build that to any size and shape. The houses we're going down are very much coming out the factory, and they have many benefits. But the weak point of that is you are basically, it's a 5 meter wide box, because that's what you can get on the back of a truck. So yes, it can be done, and we can do it, but we're kind of moving away from it. Yeah, Dave's your man. Go, Dave.
We're focusing on the region at the moment, with a view of being able to actually supply housing nationally. Size and shape shouldn't matter based on the digital approach that we're actually taking and the way that we will be able to tailor houses. At the moment, the company's got 2 avenues that it's tackling. So one, we're working with other developers who have got small projects, 2, 3, 4 homes in the pipeline. And they work with us really early on, so we can get our architect involved, because you've got to bring into consideration all the design considerations of a passive house. At the same time, the company is focusing also on building its own developments, and we've just done a joint venture. So we should see construction start for around about 25 to 30 units near Birstall up in West Yorkshire. So we're taking both approaches, and as time goes on, we should be able to scale up the capacity to deliver for self-builders.
Thank you.
But I think what both of you have said is we need to break the monopoly of the big volume house builders, really, to collectively get enough zero carbon housing built over the next 10, 20 years. Next question is from Maya, and I think we've already, you've already discussed some of the answers to this, but Maya, if you want to say your question, and then maybe Dave and Martin, you can expand on some of the things you've already been talking about. It's basically, how do we get the public sector to move on this? Maya, are you there? Do you want to voice your...
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I think we've covered this a bit, but yeah, what can we do to force the public sector to only allow developments like this? So I recently asked Derby City Council at a council meeting about this, and why are they allowing developers to install gas boilers still? And they said, they gave these examples of how they've got some homes with passive things and renewable heating, but they said they want to lead by example, and they gave the impression that they don't have any power to put any conditions in developers, but they approve planning permissions. So how can we stop them allowing planning permissions? It's just a basic thing, like gas boilers just shouldn't be allowed, especially as they're going to be phased out in a few years anyway. So how can you make the council just change the things that they give planning permission to?
They're trying to meet the urgent need. I'm also, I've started off as a property investor with buy-to-let properties before my interest of building to a high standard came along. And I looked at retrofitting houses and looked at new build construction, and retrofitting for me seems like that's the big challenge. And it was more than I could take on, and more than I could financially tackle as well as a property investor. I just didn't have the resources to start retrofitting the houses that I owned. I'm currently undergoing I'm going to call it a horrendous experience. So we've got this green build credit system that's been rolled out. And I've got a house where they've got 3 vulnerable elderly people in there with dementia, cancer, and just elderly. A company came along, forged my signature, stripped out a perfectly good working electrical heating system from the home, installed a insulation system, and walked away. And they got probably paid somewhere in the region of about £8,000 to do that. This house now has no central heating system in it of any sort, but it's okay because it's got insulation. I can't believe that contractors can get away with doing such a horrendous thing. Off the back of that, I've now been forced to go down the road of having a gas pipe installed to put new central heating into the building, which is not something that I wanted to do, but it was the only solution I'd got. without actually spending more than I can justify being able to spend on that particular home on reinstalling brand new full electrical heating systems. And there's a few other sort of layers to that. But the way that they're incentivizing people to meet the demand of, oh, we have houses that are not necessarily meeting the standards we're punching for, so we'll give out cash to any company that says that they can come along and do an install and help progress and improve the EPC. It's a complete joke, and it's just it's been thrown out there, and it's been badly managed, and it's not working. You know, it's not working us as a country towards a better position by any means.
Yeah, it's an odd one. We've got a situation at the minute. We've got a planning appeal going ahead because the local council, who again shall remain nameless, Rushcliffe Borough Council in Nottinghamshire, utterly hopeless. Which is a shame because I used to work for them and I have friends there, and I'm actually battling people who are actually friends of mine, but that's a whole other story. And they won't approve our 22 home net zero carbon development, but they've just approved a 51 home development in the same village from David Wilson Barrett, which will be just fossil fuel guzzling monsters. And when you look at the planning conditions, they've said, oh, well, if your site was approved at appeal, then these are the planning conditions we would insist on. It's got to be net zero, got to have electric car charging, got to have this, that, and the other. You look at the planning conditions over here for the 51 gas guzzling homes by the big builder, none of that. Zip, just on your way, do what you want. And it's just like, well, you know, which is it? It's like just complete inconsistency. And that's one of the big problems is that, you know, whether we're generous and think that they're under-resourced, whether we're cynical and think that there's, you know, some quiet words being had in someone's ear, I don't know. But it's all over the place, and there are examples of this kicking off all over the place. I mean, what do we know? We know that, yes, you're quite right, gas boilers theoretically banned in 2 years, and the industry's approach to that is kind of to go, yeah, it'll never happen, which seems like a pretty odd way to run your business, thinking that something that's going to fundamentally change in 2 years will probably never happen because you'll be able to convince them to drop it. I think government might be serious about that. Say in Nottingham, where I know, for example, there's a condition that 10% of the energy of the home must be locally generated, which basically translates into solar power, right? So go around Nottingham and look at some of the new build developments, and what will you find on people's roofs? One solar panel. It's like, it's like it take all the effort in putting solar panels on the roof is getting up there in the first place. It's like the actual panels themselves cost like hardly anything now, right? So it's like you've gone to all the trouble of getting a scaffold and building a roof and all the rest of it, and then you put one panel on it. Just put 10 on it. It's like the extra cost is like zip, you know. It just drives me crazy. So even there, where they're well intentioned, it still falls down because everyone just goes, well, what's the least I can get away with? So what happens is you end up in a scenario where the planners just feel browbeaten. They just feel like, well, what's the point? And it's just kind of trudging along. And someone needs to sort of give them a bit of a boot in a kind of nice way and say, look, no, come on, we can do better than this. You know, and what does sensible conditions look like? And don't forget that conditions have to be mutually agreed. When you get your planning permission, the conditions in it should not be a surprise. And if they are a surprise, you can actually challenge it and say, well, we never had a discussion around this. This is what's happening to us in Rushcliffe. They've said, well, these will be your conditions. And we're like, well, where's the chat? You know, we don't mind them, but where's the conversation to say these are what they are, you know? So the whole thing's a bit of a nightmare. But the more you lobby your council and say, you know, surely you can come up with a standard set of things that are in, you know, part of that local plan process, part of your, you know, just working out what you want, and say these are a minimum what you should be realistically to expect. And, you know, frankly, building a house these days without putting solar panels on it, well, unless it's a super passive house where you can probably get away without them actually, then, you know, really there's no excuse, and that should be relatively straightforward. It's all a bit depressing on a sunny day, isn't it?
Maya, did you want to come back on that? You got your hand up.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, it sounds like the only thing I can imagine that's going to get change is if enough people get angry about this and there's a public outcry. Yeah. So like this is just an initial idea, and I know it's going to take a lot of effort. But if you could take all the things you've said here and somehow we could use it as campaign materials, And then, because I've noticed just by like the Facebook groups I'm in, that there's a lot of anger from people about developments at the moment. They're being pushed through all over the country, and there's tons of, you know, people are losing their green spaces and countryside, and people also are aware we're in a climate emergency. So I think there could be a lot of public appetite for opposing, you know, these kind of things being bulldozed through and unsustainable homes. So I think it's only if there's enough sort of public outcry and the press covers it enough, and then all this sort of corruption is exposed, that then the changes might be brought about. Because at the moment, it just seems like the developers and big businesses are getting to do whatever they want. So it's, you have to kind of shame them into changing, and then the councils might feel like they have enough power to bring those things in. But I think it's only if there's a public outcry, like through a campaign.
Yeah,
Martin, do you want to come back in?
I think that's absolutely right. And, you know, we do ultimately still live in a democracy. And it's a funny one when yeah, I mean, nobody likes to see green fields dug up and turned into housing necessarily, except maybe the people who end up living there. But it is a reality of life, and it will be a reality of life. It's never going to stop. But most people aren't necessarily opposed to the idea of the new housing. They're often opposed to the impact it has on the local infrastructure, because no one's thinking about whether the health centre's got capacity and all those kind of things. But also, people just don't like the fact that the type of houses that get built could be anywhere. There's no local distinctiveness about it. It's like, it's not so bad if you try and build something that's at least vaguely in keeping with where you live, and doesn't look like it's just arrived out of some national architect's, you know, book of cookie cutter designs. You know, there's nothing more depressing than driving around the country and looking at modern housing estates that could be built anywhere from about 1983 onwards, and they all look basically the same. You know, it's really quite bleak. And it's like, people won't mind houses so much if they actually get a bit more of a say in what gets built, what it looks like, how it gets built, and, you know, and all those kind of things. And that's why this model design code thing is the best we've got at the moment. It will not be perfect, but there is an opportunity there for every local area to create its own design code and say, this is the sort of thing we want to see. If anyone on this has ever been involved in creating a neighbourhood plan, as I have, you'll know it can be quite a tortuous process. But in theory, it's a very good one, and it can be made to work. And, you know, you need your councillors and you need your planning departments to not ride roughshod over that when those things get created.
I think it's worth also just remembering where the other pressure comes from, and the other pressure comes from a housing shortage. You've got local authorities that have got to hit a target of delivering so many houses for their local population. They're getting outcry at, you know, the prices of houses and how difficult it is to get onto the housing ladder. So how do you fix that? You create more houses as quick as you can. So they yield to the organisations that can deliver that. And I suppose maybe it comes down to which argument, you know, pushes forward and gets centre stage, really.
The sort of dichotomy, I think it's a false dichotomy. It's like, if you want more houses, they have to be of a lower standard, so we can churn them all out.
Yeah.
I fundamentally reject that view of world, but yeah, you understand how it comes about. You know, it is like a sense of being held to ransom. You know, we've got to build this 300,000 houses a year.
Accept and allow the monopoly, don't they? In the sense of, well, we can't force them to build a higher quality house, and they're the people, they're the organisations that can deliver volume. So they take one knee towards them, shall we say?
And I think the other point is for social housing, it's, you know, if a council owns the social housing, it's going to have a much lower whole life cost, isn't it, to have a more energy efficient building that's also more comfortable for residents as well.
And there's definitely a different approach from local authorities. You know, they are starting to think about their own projects and building them to a higher standard. I'm definitely observing that on my local authorities. They're not, you know, they're doing pilot schemes or planning to do pilot schemes.
Okay.
You see, Lisa, that a lot of the modular housing of whatever form it takes is the people making that stuff are very much targeting the housing association, local authority, private rented sector. And there's several reasons for that. Obviously, the quicker your house gets built, the sooner it's occupied and earning you money. But also the argument is very clear, which is, yeah, if you are, of those 99% of all those houses getting built in this country that are, you know, B rated or below, if that's a rental house, then you're absolutely right. At some point in the next 20 years, the landlord is going to have to turf the occupiers out, spend a ton of money improving it to a standard, and then let them move back in. So they've got a double whammy of extra cost in the future and loss of income in the future, which could be easily dealt with by just simply building to a slightly higher standard today. So it's absolutely the right place to go to sort of grasp that. And if they're allowed to build at any kind of scale, then maybe you'd see a real difference, because eventually your manufacturers, your house builders will eventually go, well, if I have to build to a standard for these folks, I might as well build it for myself at the same time. So who knows?
Okay, we've still got quite a few questions. I'm going to come back to Carl's got a technical question, but also a very important question about retrofit. I'm going to come back to that, because just to stay on the theme of democracy and what we can do, I'm going to jump to Anne's question about council elections. And do you want to come in?
Yeah. Well, just before I come in, Maya's just reminded me of something when she was talking about protesting. Last year, some of you on this call will remember, last year we had an event outside North East Derbyshire Council, and we had this giant pink wind turbine, and we didn't know what to do with it afterwards. And myself and a friend went and tied it outside one of the local massive housing developments, this giant pink wind turbine that said, "Demand low carbon housing."
Brilliant.
Got some funny looks from the passing traffic. Anyway, my question is, yeah, we've got council elections coming up. So this is county council, and we're looking at asking prospective candidates to sign some pledges. And I'm just wondering what we can be asking them to sign up to in terms of housing, planning and housing. I know, because district council have a lot of the responsibility, don't they, in terms of planning? But I guess with Derbyshire County Council, they are at the moment selling a lot of their land for housing. I just wonder if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Two things. You're right, the district councils are the planning authority, but Derbyshire have two things going for them. You're absolutely right. The county councils own a lot of land, and Derbyshire's actively thinking about selling off its land assets. And they, I mean, if you take the words of the leaders sincerely, and I've no reason to think otherwise, they will. She says, laughing. I didn't mean that to sound cynical. But let's be generous. And they reckon they do seem to understand the idea that there's an element of forward-thinking stewardship about what land assets they do have and what they can and can't do with them. However, the example I gave is a perfect example of where nobody's joining up the dots, right? So pledge number one should be no selling off of land to the highest bidder, without strings attached. And the first string that should be attached is, those houses have to be to, at the very, very, very least, that EPCA rated standard, which by the way, isn't that great. It's good. It still puts you in the top 1% of all houses. Well done us. Woo. But it's not that great. It's good enough, but it's not that great. It's not the full-on net zero passive house standard that we really want. But that's what they can do. And the other big thing, of course, that the county council are responsible for is highways. So highways are the people who insist that every development has 1 million car parking spaces, and every development is designed around bin lorries and great big turning heads and all of that stuff. Now, there are all sorts of national rules about this stuff, which they'll tell you they have to follow. It's all kind of nonsense. But, go back later through my slides when I send them out, and you'll see there's that example of a model site. It's from somewhere down in Reading or somewhere like that, but it's a typical kind of modern estate. Just look at the land take for tarmac, right? In all its forms, be it the roads, be it the turning head, be it the parking bays, all of those things. It's half the site. Half the site is roads. It's like the answer is not to design housing estates around bin lorries. It's to design bin lorries around housing estates. And again, the bin lorries are the responsibility of the district councils. The county council needs to say, we're not going to obsess about this. This isn't going to be, we're not going to effectively have a right of veto over the design of an estate, because you can get the biggest wagons in. and you've still got to think about fire engines and ambulances and all that stuff. But you know, the Swedes have a town called Lund, L-U-N-D, where the nearest you can park to your house is about 300 or 400 meters away, and it's designed so that emergency vehicles can get in, but you park and you walk. And if you don't, and caveat emptor, you know, if you don't like it, go and live somewhere else. You know, nobody's making you live there. You know, you have a choice, you know. And I say, this is where I kind of put my free market head on and say, if I want to build a housing estate without any parking and nobody wants to move there because where they park their car is more important than anything else, that's fine. Fine, you know, I'll sell to someone who has a different attitude. But you're imposed by all these kind of rules. So, you know, what you do with your land and what you make other people do with their land in terms of, you know, access and wagons and all that sort of stuff, it all needs a fundamental rethink. So anyone who pledges to say that we put people first and cars and bin lorries second gets my vote. That's the very simple version. It's a lot more nuanced than that, but you can at very least say that, you know, people are far more important than, you know, a 30-foot long bin lorry that comes down your street for 5 minutes a week.
Yeah.
I love what you're saying there, Martin, about the bin lorry, and I've not really thought about it that way myself, but definitely seeing these challenges of how you design. We're going through it at the moment. We've got a joint venture partner that can't get his head around the idea of car parking not being at the doorstep of the house. So I think approaching a council and telling them that it's a hell of a lot cheaper to redesign your rubbish collection system, and you know, rather than trying to redesign or trying to force change in the housing market, I think that would naturally come because Martin would be able to build out his scheme as such. I think to answer your question about what you could get councillors to step up to, and I think this is a really cheap way of raising the issue and, you know, bringing it to light, would be to have them do a carbon life cycle assessment of projects. And just so that can then just be held up on any occasion that something is approved. And it can be almost used as a shame card to say, hang on, you're approving this scheme, but look at its carbon life cycle. Everything in this document tells you this is wrong. It costs a couple £100 of somebody's time to do an assessment on a house. So you're only talking a few £1,000s on larger schemes and developments. But by tagging that along any kind of project, I suppose even if you looked at your bin lorries, you know, they're getting through their diesel and, you know, doing a comparison of a fleet of electric bin lorries versus diesel lorries to have the equivalent of an EPC for government projects might be an interesting way of bringing this to light, that bad decisions are being made and they are not in line with the climate emergency that they are declaring.
Okay, presumably from what you said earlier, we should be asking councils that if they're going to sell their land, well, instead of selling the land for housing, either specify it should be for eco housing or retain the land and, you know, have somebody build eco housing on it. Presumably that should be an ask as well.
Oh, 100%. It's like there's enough private land sitting around that the big developers of land bank where they can build their getting away with the minimum standard allowed housing on. So the very least you can, a public authority can do that owns land is to say, and this applies not just to local authorities, but also to Homes England, the government's land agent, you know, they could right now, it would be the easiest thing in the world to do to say, right, every bit of land sold from now on must have housing put on it to this standard. Done. Right, it's that simple, you know. Old Robert Jenrick could, as minister, could just say, okay, that's it, signed up, done. You know, every local authority leader that owns land assets could just say, yep, that's what we're going to build to. It's really that simple. There's nothing stopping them from doing it. You know, after all, it's their asset. You know, what happens to it is entirely up to them. You know, and like I say, the best way of doing that is don't sell it. You know, do it together so we can keep to that standard and we don't lose it down the line. You know,
the local authority has to be made to do it though, because as I said before about it being fragmented, their asset team is told, we are skin, we're cutting jobs, we need you to raise X millions from flogging assets. And so therefore their agenda becomes about selling to the biggest. So until they've got a united agenda or good law literally stating that they can only sell their assets on the principles of X, Y, and Z. I mean, they do it with health and safety. They can only, you know, further a project if it is delivered with these, you know, set levels of health and safety. So yeah, they've got to be forced to, because they have other pressures coming from elsewhere.
Just give you a quick example on that. Newark and Sherwood District Council recently put out a tender to replace, they've got a homeless hostel, like 22 self-contained mini flats. And they put out a tender to bulldoze the thing. It was only built in 1991, and there's a whole question about eco footprint of knocking down buildings, but that's another story. And basically rebuild it on the same basic footprint. And in the conditions for that were, it has to be built using modular construction, so some form of factory build, or like Dave's system where it's built on site but built to that kind of eco standard. It has to be a minimum of EPC of A rated, and that they put this criteria in the spec, you know, and that's on their land for their development that they're going to then own. You know, they're going to, obviously they're keeping ownership of it. So, you know, don't let any council tell you it can't be done. It can't be specified out. It absolutely can. And there are examples of this, but it's more where they thought, oh, that sounds like a good idea, rather than it's a fundamental policy shift. There you say, there are examples you can pick on, but it's not widespread, and that's an easy fix, he says.
Okay, great. Right, we're gonna switch topics now. We're gonna go back. I know you guys are talking about new build, but can we talk about retrofit? That's really important. Carl, do you want to just ask your question? You've got a general question about retrofit and then quite a specific technical question. Are you there, Carl?
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. Dave, Martin, really impressed with what you're doing. This should be the standard for everybody. But unfortunately, 80% of the housing that will be around in 2050 already exists. So how are we going to sort that massive amount of housing and get it to zero carbon? That's the general question. The sort of specific question is that I'm aware that there are some super insulating products coming onto the market, things like silica aerogels. And have you heard about the potential of things like that to be the silver bullet that can solve, for example, making Victorian terraced houses energy efficient quickly and fairly cheaply? Long question, difficult question, but we're going to have to ask these kinds of questions.
Let's go first.
Yeah, I mean, I looked into retrofitting when I wanted to, you know, progress and make change. I suppose even in my own career as a property investor, and I can't see my way through it. It's extremely foggy. Every building is unique and needs a bespoke approach to it. So there's no such, I mean, the silver bullet may be in terms of for a particular type of house, and you did say Victorian then. There are many companies working on this, and you know, they've got their expertise in developing it and promoting it, and I hope that they succeed. You know, I firmly believe that you have to focus your energy on what you know and what you can change. And for me, I've taken the approach, and the first step is to tackle a blueprint, so creating a new build. Once I feel I've succeeded there, then turning my eye to retrofitting is something that would probably naturally follow. At this moment in time, I really don't know how that's going to be achieved, but we are way off being able to achieve it with anything that's been put out there by government or local authorities to date.
I think this is, Dave's got a point there about every house as being genuinely different. I mean, before we started Positive Homes, as Lisa said at the beginning, my wife and I work for Nottingham City Homes, and our journey was that we spent £200 million doing about 25,000 council houses, which hadn't had any money spent on them for a generation, and we won't go into why that is. But that was all your classic stuff. So you're talking about, you know, your typical kind of 50s housing estates, those kind of really well-built semis that fetch up on Homes Under the Hammer and make me cringe because someone's making money out of it when it should still be a council house. Don't go there. And you're talking about double glazing, you're talking about more insulation in the loft, you're talking about a new boiler, so kitchens, replacing kitchens, bathrooms, you know, so real kind of fundamental stuff. And we're kind of, as a country, still in that point. We're still at the point where there are so many houses that are so bad. You know, if you look at all those energy efficiency certificates, if you download them all 15 million of them, you look at the number of Fs and Gs and things still floating around. And one of the things we're very proud of in Nottingham was we dragged our average energy efficiency rating up from something like an E to a C. And I mean, I'd say, well, what does that mean? But it's a tremendous, I mean, just in terms of cost of energy bills, you know, we were reducing people's energy bills by hundreds of pounds a year. So it's fantastic. But that's only just your basics. It doesn't get you anywhere near a net zero carbon society. So, hey, simple answer, just get rid of the gas boiler, put a air source heat pump in, done. There you go, done, simple, net zero carbon, because the grid's net zero. And the poor person in that council house has their energy bill go from £650 a year to £5,000 a year. Who knows? You know, and fuel poverty, and we're back where we started. So that's just clearly not an option. And the problem you have, of course, as Dave's absolutely right, is that every single house needs a bespoke solution. With a new house, it's like, you know, especially if you build modular, it's like, here's a standard house. You can build it from the scratch. It's really, really easy. Retrofit, nightmare. So yeah, when you get into things like internal wall insulation or external wall insulation, you see a lot of council estates, housing association estates, where they're bolting on vast amounts of polystyrene type stuff, which hopefully isn't going to burn. That's a whole other question, isn't it? And smarter people than me will tell you that that's the cladding crisis of 20 years down the line, because you're taking a house that was never designed to be self-contained. Victorian houses, I got friends who move into a Victorian house. What's the first thing they do? Replace all the old sash windows with nice brand new double glazing windows, put brand new carpets in, and their entire house fills up with condensation. Because the house was never designed to be airtight or even close to it. It was designed to have ventilation going through it, and you lit a fire and you were colder. You know, people just were, and everybody went out and did manual labor and their body temperatures were higher and all that. I don't know, you know, and so this is your problem. This is a lovely, this may be fascinating to people. It's not really answering the question, is it? Which is, the problem is that we're a way off having an answer, and fundamentally it'll come down to finance until a simple system whereby you can trust someone to come along and say, I'm going to do these things to your houses and it will work and it will be financed in this way. Because simply saying to most people, hey, you're going to need to spend 15, 20, 30,000 pounds on your house, never going to happen. Never. Completely unrealistic. So do we wait for the next technology to come along? Yeah, maybe. Do we just say, hey, you know what, we've got a work cut out just putting 500 mils worth of loft insulation in everyone's loft? And you know, maybe you put triple glazing in, and do you get solar panels on people's roofs? And there's some real basics we need to do before we get anywhere. And yeah, it's a real problem. All the more onus on the new build stuff to be done right, because retrofitting the old stuff. Of course, if we want to solve the economic problems, you can't retrofit a house in China. You know, you have to do it on site. You have to do it in Derbyshire, using people from Derbyshire to do the work. You know, so getting a grip on that is brilliant. But do I have the answer? No. Do I have Eckers? Dave's system that he uses, by the way, the BT passive system, there is a retrofit system version of that house. You effectively build an entirely new skin around the outside of the existing house. Unlike those ones where you bolt the polystyrene on, this one actually breathes properly. It actually has the mechanical ventilation built into it, and it's expensive, but it's brilliant. There are other systems. There's one called Energy Sprong, where you basically bolt a whole new skin to the house. They did this project in Nottingham, and how that works is that the company comes along, fits it for free, carries on charging you the £1,000 a year or whatever it is that you're spending on your energy bill, but they buy the energy for your house. And because they've made your house more insulative, the energy bill for your house is now £500 a year. So the occupier pays 1,000. The cost of the actual cost is 500, and in that gap is how the fitters make a return on their initial investment. So there's a model that we could pursue. That's complicated, and it's probably open to abuse by all sorts of dodgy people. But there's a model there that can be made to work in theory, and that's probably where we'll end up.
Yeah, I mean, that's no more different, is it, to hire purchase on a car, isn't it? It's we give it you now, you pay it back over the years.
Thanks very much, folks. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just give a plug? Anybody who's interested in insulating their homes, we did we've done eco-housing workshops on insulation, on do-it-yourself solar lighting, and also air source heat pumps. So they're all on our website, the recordings of those. Just going to go through all the questions. I think Sarah's got one. I think we might have answered that, but Sarah, do you want to come in about, it's about wide scale adoption? I think we've already covered it, but you might want to just, if there's anything else there that hasn't been answered. Sarah Taylor there.
To be fair, I think it's probably cancelled. It's been great covered. It's been great hearing all the suggestions, and I think definitely partnerships going forward seem to be the way forward. But thank you. It's been a fantastic session.
Okay, great. Got a technical question from John Beardmore about injection. John, are you there?
Just a question going back to David's presentation. You talked about injecting insulation when the houses were being built. And I just wondered what insulation you used and what the embedded carbon is in that insulation. Yeah, so the BT passive system uses EcoBead, which is a polymer, 2% polymer blasted with steam. Now I pulled that up, so I did clock your question there. What the company advertise it as, an inert and non-toxic nature of EPS, which provides sustainability in landfill because it does not biodegrade or leach chemicals into the water system or grasses or into the air. Life cycle analysis demonstrates that EPS has an exceptional qualities as a construction material. It has a zero ozone depletion potential and a low global warming potential, and achieves the highest possible A+ summary rating in the BRE Global Green Guide to Specification. That's what the marketing bump says on EcoBead. In the future, I see materials such as wood fibre and cellulose being more appropriate to achieving what we want to achieve. Just one more question about it. Can it be used in retrofit in wall as a cavity wall insulation? Yeah, I don't see why not, because it doesn't hold moisture. It's breathable. It drains if let's say your gutters overflow backwards into the cavity. So yeah, I don't see why you couldn't use it.
Okay. Just one follow-up on that, John. The great thing about EcoBead is this is where you start talking about the performance gap. So your cavity wall insulation, or if you're putting out a loose insulation in your walls, whatever, it's the classic thing is where it starts sagging, and if you get the heat meter on, you'll see the sort of top 1 foot of your wall is basically hollow. The EcoBead stuff is brilliant. If in the BT system as well is even better, because basically you get a continuous insulation. So they actually pump it into the floor. It goes up around the sides and across the top if you want, and it just creates basically a single blanket. So there's no holes in it. And one of the problems that we've always had is that when you build a new house, for example, the suppliers of the timber box are not interested in the floor. They're interested in the walls and the roof, and not the floor. And of course, if you know about how these things work, even though everyone's taught as a kid that heat rises, you actually lose an awful lot of heat downwards. Especially in that diagonal gap. So actually where the wall meets the floor. So the EcoBead thing in a new build is great because you just it's thought of as a single system. But yeah, it's about as, I'd say the EcoBead product is about as good as it gets these days. It's pretty Rolls-Royce stuff. Great, thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from David Stunners. I think you've already answered that about applying new build techniques to upgrading existing houses. You talked about the energy sprung technique. David, is there anything else that hasn't been answered there? David Stunners?
No, I think it's been covered.
Okay.
In particular, though, it's useful to know whether some of the particular techniques they use in terms of insulation could be applied to old houses. But I think much of that has been talked about already.
Okay, lovely, thank you. There's a question from Carol about retrofitting first before putting your heat pumps in. Carol, where are you? Do you want to say the question?
Okay. Thanks, really engaging presentations and chat. Thank you. Yeah, I in my own mind, I can't get my head around the discrepancy between stepping straight to changing a heat source if you've still got damp drafts, poor double glazing and poor insulation. And so in my mind, if I was doing a retrofit, I'd probably look, I'd look to do, sort out my insulation first. And then only then
would I look to change my heat source? So, and I'd probably step through maybe to a more upgrade my current boiler to something more using the latest technology as a step to something, because the technology for gas boilers and home heating systems has moved on so much. So in fact, I've just replaced my own boiler that was like 10, 12 years old, and it's made such a difference to the quality of our heating and our energy bills. So why are we not sort of doing a phased approach? Why do you know why the push is to move straight to heat pumps, and also the embodied carbon in heat pumps as well? These have got to be made somehow, and making millions and millions of individual heat pumps, I'm not quite sure about the sort of carbon footprint of that strategy, really.
Carol, you're absolutely right. Do not go anywhere near any kind of clever heating system or even solar panels until you've done the absolute basics. And that is cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, decent windows, and a decent, basically find out where your drafts are. That's the best thing. Because I've just realized I should set myself up in business here. We've got one of those magic air blower kits, air tightness kits. And these are amazing things where you pressurize up your house. So if you've ever seen these in operation, you basically open up your front door, you put this thing over it, and it's got a huge fan in it, basically, which pumps. This is how you work out how airtight your house is. So you pressurize up your house, and then you go around looking for the drafts, because if you do that, you'll put your hand around your windows, and you'll suddenly feel air sucking in like crazy from outside as the house is kind of deep. If you depressurize it, or it doesn't matter which way around you do it, and you'll find that even if you've got really, really good windows, if they've been fitted by a bunch of cowboys in a rush, then you effectively might as well just take the windows out and just not have them, because all the drafts are coming in, all through the gaps and everything. And it's do all those real basic things first. And yeah, gas boilers bad. Yes, true. Fossil fuel not good, right? Don't believe the hype about the hydrogen, by the way. That's probably my best advice. But if you have a gas central heating system and you have a leaky house that you're not going to really realistically be able to improve to a very high standard, then a modern gas boiler replacing an older gas boiler is still a win. That's good. I was saying at the beginning, don't let very good be the enemy of great. Sometimes just good enough is important, because what you currently have is awful. And yeah, you do need a bit of a stepping stone approach. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, I would say. If funny, now you mention it, my boiler's 12 years old, and it's like, do I replace it, or do I don't know what to do? It's like, it feels so wrong, but also maybe the only option in my house.
Going for the easy wins, isn't it?
Yeah.
But why is the government pushing for air source heat pump? Because virtually nobody's got an air source heat pump at the moment, have they? And it's just it just seems such a big step change to do all at once. Or have I got something? Am I missing something?
No, you're not missing something. That they're. I mean, in a well insulated house, they make a lot of sense. The problem with air source heat pumps, for those who don't know, is that the colder it is, the less efficient they are. And when do you want your air source heat pump to be at its most efficient? You want it to be its most efficient in the winter when it's cold. Right? So you end up with a scenario where if it's not done right, and especially if it's not installed right and sized right and all those kind of things, you end up with a scenario where you're actually making things worse. If you live in the middle of nowhere and you're not connected to the gas grid and you're importing oil, then get an air source pump. You might as well. At least then you're not burning up more fossil fuels. Yes, they have a carbon footprint to make, just like wind turbines do and solar panels do. There's a whole issue around that. Electric cars are only better for you after 50 years or something, or whatever the stat is. It's crazy, but
Thank you.
Carol, sorry, because we've only got a few minutes left. I just wanted to. We've only got really time for one last question. Anybody interested in air source heat pumps? I recommend you have a look at our recording and notes on that, with interviews with people who've actually installed them in Derbyshire. That's great. Because we're really interested in what we can do to move get volumes of zero carbon homes. I'd just like to get your final thoughts on, as a group, there's different organisations here across Derbyshire, but what can we do collectively to really push councils on this? I mean, and to be fair to councils, it's not their fault. You know, government, you know, derailed the zero carbon home standard years ago and have, you know, hollowed out councils. So I feel, you know, some sympathy for councils. But what can we do collectively? Your final thoughts about what are the best things we can do to push this agenda forward with our councils?
Oh, do you expect me to say something intellectual and meaningful?
It's not right. I was
Well,
hoping
I've had an hour and a
somebody
half.
would
How am I
step in and do
doing? Well, yeah, it's politicians like votes. So, you know, commit to your land assets, commit to using your land assets most effectively, and commit to joining up the dots between your different policies and says don't just declare a climate emergency and go for the cheap PR. It's like you've got to follow up and actually say this means something and here's how it translates. And even in a case like North East Derbyshire, where they've done a pretty good job writing a policy, it clearly hasn't fed down to the rank and file, you know, so the officers. So there's a real agenda there to say, you know, you've got to get a grip on it. And it's really boring governance stuff, you know, but you've got to do those basics properly and really drive that on. And yes, push the big developers to say you want higher standards and wait for them to kick back, and then embarrass them. You know, why not have the nerve to do that? To say, if you're going to come and develop in our community and you're going to build something that's going to outlast every single one of us on this call, you know, then it's got to be good. You know, it's got to actually be useful. So they shouldn't be ashamed of being a bit more campaigny. You know, and you want people elected who are actually going to live up to that.
Thank
But
you.
then I'm copy, so you know, it's easier said than done, right?
Yeah. Dave, have you got any final thoughts?
Oh, final thoughts. Money drives the world at the end of the day, and yeah, local authorities and your government are making their decisions based on short-term goals, and this is what I hate about four-year government, four-year planning, this isn't thinking about the next generation. Hard decisions are made back, come from making sacrifices now. And if we make sacrifices now, whether it's a financial one and not having what people may want in the here and now to achieve their short-term goals and suffer a little bit of pain, you know, we will then be able to facilitate and pass on a better world to the next generation. But that's the problem with politics. It's always short-term. I think looking at carbon, and if you're going to declare a climate emergency and we have these targets to meet, they've got to be brought into law right now as to how we measure and monitor our progression. Penalise those that are burning it up. So if a developer is building something that is not carbon friendly, make them pay tax on every kilogram of carbon that project is creating. If a developer is working towards the greater good and towards a longer term goal and making the sacrifices of digging in their pocket and spending more on building better quality, then reward them with the monies and the, you know, the fines, the taxes that have been charged to those that don't give two tosses about it. And unleash the potential of the pathfinders and the small businesses that are looking to innovate and bring change. And the only way to do that is to actually give them the support rather than leaving them to try and find their way themselves. Martin will have this experience, although I know Homes England, he mentioned, gave, you know, a significant loan, was it, not grant?
It's a loan, yeah.
Loan, yeah. Making it viable and I suppose removing the barriers that are preventing small businesses from growing and making a headway and setting a good example. And if we can set a good example and have our potential unleashed, it will force change, because people in the market will want better homes. They will stop buying the crap and they will start buying the better quality, and they will pay more for that. And that links right back to the world is driven by money. And the moment that developers see that they are only losing and their businesses are going to go and become extinct if they don't move on to the more profitable method of construction, which is building to a quality that people want and demand and will buy, then they will continue to do what they continue to, you know, they've always done.
Brilliant. That's a fantastic place to end there. So thank you ever so much to Martin Valentine and Dave Bradley Bowles. Can we just give them a round of applause? You can do your little reactions at the bottom with a clap. And that was an absolutely fantastic, you know, hour and a half, really interesting.
Can I just squeeze one remark in there for? And I think this is on behalf of Martin as well, if you don't mind me saying. But if anyone on this call has opportunities, joint ventures, wants to look at projects and tap our experience or see how, you know, either organisation can support them progress their own goals, I certainly will welcome any contact. And you know, if we can create change together, that would be amazing.
Yeah,
thank you.
totally.
And brilliant. And just to say, we are recording this. We'll distribute the recording to everybody. You know, so you know, if you want to share that, that would be great. And just to say, this is the first in a series of Countdown to COP events on how we get to zero carbon. The next one will be on zero carbon transport in March, and then food in April, and then all the way through to November. So hope you can join us for those. And you know, just to say, you know, this is Transition Chesterfield. Hope you found that really interesting, as I did, and look forward to seeing you again. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Martin and Dave, brilliant. Or you can stop recording, Margaret. Thank you. Figure that out.